Today we're going to talk about leadership. And we're going to talk about it from somewhat more of an abstract perspective at the beginning, and then perhaps look at some theories and their applications. Perhaps single most important question that we could start our uh, discussion would be: is leadership reality, or is it a social construction that observers attribute to observed and interpreted events? So, in other words, is leadership a reality, or is the presence of a single leader, a traditional type of leadership, otherwise referred to as bureaucracy, um, is that type of leadership that is assuming that a leader possesses some sort of leadership qualities. Is that type of leadership superior to more of a team-based, distributed kind of leadership? And and of course, that may depend on the circumstances. That may be situational in a sense. Uh, but perhaps kind of a dichotomous question that go along with that. When we ponder whether bureaucracy or team-based approach uh, with dispersed kind of leadership is a better option, we might want to ask a kind of a dichotomous question, nature nurture debate. Um, is leadership as we know it, is bureaucracy part of uh, nature, or is it a socially constructed concept? Because if it is part of nature, there are two things we can presume. Number one uh, is that it's probably good for us, because nature usually provides us with good stuff. But most importantly, there is not much we can do about it, because, of course, we can usually the only thing we can do is to break ourselves against the nature. Uh, Now, on the other hand, if we presume that bureaucracy, a single type of leadership, is a socially constructed concept, then of course there are two opposite assumptions can be made. Number one, uh, that it may be good for us, perhaps in some circumstances, but most importantly, that it can be changed. And of course, what is the answer? Whether which assumptions are more correct than the others, and there is a debate over that, and scientists theorize on that. So, for instance, some would say that family is a perfect example for bureaucracy, as being part of nature, because when we look at most of the families, for the most part, up until kids grow up and make their own decisions, it is the parents that make the decisions for the entire family. So there's some sort of a bureaucracy here. There's some sort of a hierarchy here. Now, there's also some examples in biology. When we look under the microscope, there are obviously some inferior organisms, we might call them parasites, that that depend on the survival on some superior organisms, higher level organisms. But of course, there are also certain theories that have been debunked over time in terms of what is important and what dominates in terms of bureaucracy and hierarchy. Like for instance, birds flying. We can often see that on the covers of the books on leadership. We can see birds flying in V shape, and assumption is, of course, that the bird at, at, at the intersection is the most dominant one, is the most superior one, in other words, is the leader, and all other birds are followers. And ornithologists actually debunk that theory because they believe that the formation has to do not with leading or following anybody, but with safety, with safety arrangements. And perhaps just to close this introductory part, Robert Greenleaf, in his book Individual as Leader, actually points to the oldest management theorist, and he believes that Moses, actually not Moses, but Moses's father-in-law. We may recall that from the Old Testament in the Bible, Moses at some point, overwhelmed with the complaints from his people, approaches his father-in-law Jethro, who advises him to create leaders, to create leaders of thousands, leaders of hundreds, and therefore create the hierarchy of bureaucracy. And he believes, jokingly, that the reason that Moses, the real reason why Moses has not been allowed to enter the promised land was nothing to do with his disobedience to God. We may recall, instead of using his pure faith and words, he used his stick to get the water running out of the rock. And but he believes the real reason for which he was disallowed to enter the promised land was the creation of a lousy organizational theory, the bureaucracy and disallowance. So, of course, in the context of our discussion on the relevance of a performance of a single leader, single CEO, there comes also the discussion on CEO pay, especially vis-a-vis that of a rank and file workers. So let me give you a few statistics on the difference between those two, and the data comes from 2018. CEO pay of S&P 500 index firm averaged 13.9 million. Now the average rank and file worker pay it came to $38,613. Therefore, the difference accounts to about 361 times more than that of rank and file workers. In banking industry, the difference can be 4 times as high, up to even 1,200 or more. CEO median raises for in 2018 year to year came to about 6.4%, whereas average worker for the same in the same period came to about 3.5%. That means about half of that CEO. Now, when we thought about the evolution of the thought of leadership within the last 100 years, we can see quite a shift from leadership being part of perhaps philosophy to today leadership being part of perhaps psychology or applied psychology. In other words, if in the past we would looking for effective leadership, effective leaders, we would look at a person, in a sense, a person's character, and the person, him or herself. As today, we probably take more practical view and look at, rather than looking at who the person is, although that may be relevant to a certain extent, we probably would mostly look at how well that person can do the job. I will provide you with a few definitions in terms of, and that might give you a little bit insight in terms of what we've been looking for in effective leaders as decades moved on across the 20th century. Munson, 1921. Effective leadership is the creative and directive force of morale. Keyword, a force of morale. So of course, again, that we would associate concept of morality with that of philosophy, ethics, and so on. Fiedler, 1967. Directing and coordinating the work of group members. Julian, 1969. An interpersonal relation in which others comply because they want to, not because they have to. So we can see again a shift towards building relationships with the employees. Buss, 1985, transforming followers, creating visions of the goals that may be attained. Again, if we look at the literature in 80s, we can see it's full of transformational leadership. Jackson, 1996. Active leadership is an active process that requires a willingness to take risks and be innovative. Again, 90s, of course, accelerated need for innovation and creativity, and of course, leaders that are able to provide that. And finally, Carter, 2003. Leadership is about coping with change. Of course, Of course, that the ability to deal with change and adapt to new environment environments remain a feature desired from most leaders today.